Dear colleagues, what a shame that we're meeting only digitally. I was very much looking forward to my first EASA conference, but this is it. But trying to look at the bright side of life, I decided to film my presentation so that you can be with me in the field while I am discussing my paper today that is entitled The Northernmost Dilemma, Perception of Climate Change in the Melttown of Longyearbyen. My name is Zdenka Sokolickova, and since February 2019 I work as a guest researcher at the Department of Social Anthropology, University of Oslo. And Thomas, our discussant today, is the mentor of my project entitled Boreal Life Overheating in the High Arctic, that consists of 2 years of fieldwork in the town of Longyearbyen, which is the settlement that you can see behind me. The town is situated on the archipelago of Svalbard, which is located in the high Arctic at 78 degrees parallel north. In the title of the panel we read about Europe and privileged fear when it comes to environmental catastrophes. Longyearbyen lies at the margins of Europe. It is the northernmost family settlement with about 2,300 inhabitants coming from more than 50 countries. Perhaps we could even ask whether Svalbard is part of Europe at all. Well, it is governed by Norway under very special circumstances granted thanks to the so-called Svalbard Treaty, which is an international document that was drafted in 1920 and came into force 5 years later. Without diving too much into the sensitive issue of geopolitics, let me state that liminality, transience and transition are very much part of the lived experience here. I built my research upon the existing body of scholarly work that was produced during and after the ERC project Overheating, where the concept of accelerated change was presented as a lens to look at consequences often unforeseen of global processes. The term environmental catastrophe sounds harsh, and I've never heard a participant of mine use that, but the environment stays high on the agenda, together with the acknowledgement that it is changing. Climate change has lately been the driver for many people to come to Svalbard, be it researchers, politicians or visitors. When I ask Longyearbyen residents, and I've spoken to about 240 of them, about what they notice when it comes to environmental change, there are several impacts that they agree on. Number one, there is less sea ice, making it more difficult to move around the island on a snowmobile and making shipping an easier business. Number two, the temperatures are higher than they used to be. I talked to about 30 people that have been living here for more than 20 years, and some of them were born here or spent most of their lives here, and in rare cases they have over 50 years of experience with life at this place that often is being depicted as isolated and pristine and vulnerable and extreme. I might also want to add here that Longyearbyen has an extraordinary turnover of about 20% a year, which means that many people come, stay only for a few years and then they leave again. According to a report issued last year by the Norwegian Center for Climate Services, we can indeed document an annual temperature increase by 5 degrees of Celsius since 1970s. And in the wintertime, the increase reaches 8 degrees of Celsius more on average. When I accompanied for the first time my children to the kindergarten, that was in mid-February last year, and I expressed or explained the purpose of my stay, there was a teacher in her 60s who murmured, "Well, by the way, it should be minus 35 now." But for the people who are living in Longyearbyen today, the pure temperature increase is not necessarily a negative thing. Life is simpler if you have to adapt to minus 20 instead of minus 40. And in addition, the houses are generously heated by the only Norwegian power plant that is running on excellent quality black coal. On the other hand, the winter season, especially the so-called sunny winter, starting in February when the light is coming back after 3 months of pitch black darkness, is getting shorter, and annual sports events are being planned earlier every year, and people worry about a far too early end of the beloved snowmobile season because of unpredictable snow conditions in April and May. Number 3, And there is more to the changing weather patterns, namely more precipitation, including heavy rain events during the polar night as well. Let me quote one of my first participants that I met that has been living in Longyearbyen for more than 20 years. The changes in weather are very unpredictable. All the winters we have had with rain, like when you're at home and it pours down like if you were in bed again. Our worst nightmare is dark season with rain. You know, no sun, rain, dark soil, nothing to do because you can't go outside. 4 months without the sun. We have experienced some polar nights when it was raining a lot, and that does something to you. Then you think, well, this is not the place to be. The climate might change the way we live here, and if we can't go outside and do what we love, it becomes part of the discussion about whether we stay. And another typical quote would be, when I was moving up to Longyearbyen, people were telling me, do not bring your waterproof jacket, you won't need it, this is an Arctic desert, but it's bullshit, it rains a lot. Well, I have personally never experienced that, because the last winter was like in the good old days, it was long and stable and dry and cold. But when it happens, when it rains and the frost comes back, then the tundra gets a hard icy cover that makes grazing for Svalbard reindeer very difficult, and seeing the animals that come often to town starve is heartbreaking. And also walking on the slippery surfaces is risky. Number 4, the active layer of permafrost is getting deeper. Yet permafrost thaw in Longyearbyen is a very different case compared to permafrost thaw noticed by an indigenous community of reindeer herders or fishermen elsewhere in the Arctic. It has no direct impact on the livelihoods of the community, as the place is uninhabitable and unsustainable anyway, and a lively and growing village would be unthinkable without a wide range of technologies and services that are causing the highest ecological footprint per capita in the whole Europe, and if not on the whole planet. And in fact, my field notes are full of litanies contemplating about my tremendous ecological guilt, given that my research project involves one husband and 3 children at this all but environmentally friendly field for 2 years. But back to the issue of permafrost. The context in which I see the topic come up is almost exclusively the building industry. And in fact, activity of heavy machines is very much marking the character of the settlement at the moment. A new 38 meters high student dormitory is being constructed for the University Center in Svalbard, a hub in Arctic natural science. And under the hill of Sukkertoppen, a whole neighborhood of Lia is being demolished. And why is that? Number 5. In 2015, an avalanche fell down from Sukkertoppen and hit the center of Longyearbyen. It destroyed 11 houses in the prettiest neighborhood, the one most photographed by the visitors, by the way. The 2 empty rows still look like an unhealed wound, also because they remind the community of 2 lost lives, one of a father of 2 and one of a 2-year-old girl. 2 years later, or year and a half, another avalanche in a nearby area came, and luckily this time without fatalities, but shaking once again the trust of the community that at home we can be safe. It is not only avalanches but also landslides that add to the feeling that environmental risks are increasing in and near Longyearbyen. It would be far too simplistic to say that climate change is the cause. There is also the question of resilience, ability to handle environmental risks, foresee them, and avoid unnecessary damage if they're impossible to prevent. But that is not my point here. What I want to speak about is that it's always interesting to ask the people how these changes impact their attitude to the local environment. And that is where a relatively univocal description of environmental change diverges and spreads in a variety of standpoints, and where a whole range of fundamental dilemmas displays as well. First of all, there is evidence of a deeper environmental concern that some Longyearbyen residents declare, namely the fact that the costly and ecologically unsustainable town of Longyearbyen is being run by the Norwegian government as a geopolitical tool, granting Norway the right to state that there is a stable Norwegian settlement in Svalbard. That is also why as privileged in Longyearbyen are seen Norwegians that are employed by the state and or in public administration, and as underprivileged those that are dependent on the private market, both in terms of jobs and housing. There has never been an indigenous population here, and the notion of a certain inappropriateness of human presence is quite widely shared, I'd say. Having said that, the debate around mining coal in Svalbard, which is sometimes depicted only in black and white colors, suddenly gets a surprising twist. It is not at all granted that opting for tourism and research was an environmentally positive measure, taken alongside the abrupt close down of the Norwegian mining industry. Tourism has namely changed Longyearbyen in multiple ways. It has generated a lot of jobs that attract workforce from less privileged countries than the rich north. And in fact, today, 2 of the 3 largest minorities in town are from Southeast Asia, one from Thailand with about 140 residents and the Philippines with about 100 residents. In a parallel manner, as the community grew in population and became much more international, the volume of tourism increased. And research also attracts hundreds of people every year to the archipelago, and it also is an international arena. So Longyearbyen became more global, and its 100 years long identity, traditionally linked to Norwegianness and coal mining, became blurred. I once talked to a person that is employed by a local stakeholder in tourism. "It's not interesting," he murmured, "to come to a place that only has one story to tell, tourism. You need something real." Well, the real story of Longyearbyen today, as I see it, is a story about a melttown. What do I mean by that term? In case of Longyearbyen, it associates climate change that contributes to a higher speed of melting glaciers, of course, but there is more to it. Longyearbyen is a place in transition, taken by surprise by some unforeseen consequences of processes that also impacted many other places on the planet. The melting effect has multiple aspects. As it came out in in my conversations with numerous participants, in fact, it is quite difficult to say what Longyearbyen is, who is local, how the local community can be characterized. The sense of belonging is, among other things, constituted by an omnipresent feeling that the microscale of an individual life, with its wounds and hopes and dreams, clashes with a much larger scale of machineries that are interconnected and difficult to transform. The same processes, typical for globalization, that also means global acceptance of the market logic, competitiveness, growth, quantification of phenomena that actually never can be properly measured, such as home feeling or silence in the Arctic tundra. A meltdown is a place where things are changing fast, where people feel they live in an unpredictable world, and where social cohesion is being disrupted by simultaneous processes, which cannot be tackled one by one. A systemic solution is necessary. Climate change is impacting the community, but its perception varies from denial and mocking on one side to deep concern and even fear on the other side. I should not forget to say that some of my participants cannot relate to the issue very much because they're very busy worrying about satisfying the basic needs. It is often stated that one should feel privileged for being able to live in Longyearbyen. And perhaps to a certain point that's true. Just look at the mountain of Hjörtfjella behind me. I would not say, though, that fearing climate change is something that characterizes the community of Longyearbyen. The issue of climate change has rather a polarizing effect. I believe the reason for it is that ideologies that stimulate developments contributing to a negative environmental change also cause other things that right now, when tourism is almost completely being put on a halt, are seen as more burning. Climate change is both right here and somewhere out there. Longyearbyen is a unique quintessence of the rich global north, a town supposedly only for the fit, wealthy and possibly Norwegian, but the reality is much more diverse. When it comes to authorities, both central and local, I'd say that the issue of climate change is predominantly seen as a problem to be solved by technological means. But on the individual level, the range of possible answers is equally wide as the range of attitudes and perceptions. The deep dilemma that I'm also trying to document through my research has, I believe, a much wider relevance than just within the community of Longyearbyen. It is a question about how to live a dignified life in a warming world where many desire what only few have. How to change the way we relate to the natural environment, the way we understand the value of work, the way we consume and spend our free time, the way we communicate with others who are unlike us. I see climate change as an intrinsic part of a global development that penetrates all levels of human enterprise. The context of climate change and its perception in my fieldwork location is site-specific as anywhere else, but I hope that I've managed to explain why I think that the story of this meltdown can work as an inspiring example of how changing environment is intertwined with a changing human world. Thank you very much for your attention. There is a polar fox that came to listen to my presentation.